Mines. Maple Mines is the brainchild of our friend Maple right over here. And it is going to be me asking Sherry a whole bunch of questions. So I've had the chance of meeting Sherry off of the apps. And what I realized as soon as I met her and spent the day with her is she knows so much more about politics than I do, especially about BC politics. And as you know, we have an election coming up in BC on October 19th. If you aren't registered to vote, make sure you get that taken care of because we want to see as many people out of the voting stations as we can on October 19th. So, what we're going to do is we're going to talk with Sherry and Maple every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. We're going to be talking about BC politics. We might get into some other stuff after the election, but we're only like 6 weeks away from an election right now. So, we need to get as much information out there to people that we can. Did you guys have anything to add before we started to get into the juicy stuff?
So I'll just say that for me, hi, I'm Sherry. I was born and raised in British Columbia, and I had a father who was a small C conservative who took a lot of interest in politics. And so I grew up listening to all of the stories about all the parties and all the politics in British Columbia. I don't have a poli-sci degree. I don't work in the industry. I just somebody who pays attention and is concerned about my province. So
Maple, did you
that's
want to say anything?
I
No.
am super excited about our first live stream together.
me too.
Me too. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the BC Liberals and we're going to talk about the BC Conservatives. And we're going to talk about how they're the exact same people. We're going to talk about how that's confusing. We're going to talk about all their rebrands and name changes. But yeah, BC Liberals are conservatives. There's a lot of confusion because people can assume that if you're a member of the Liberal Party, whether it's provincial or federal, that means the same thing, and it doesn't. In BC, the Liberal Party are conservatives. They changed their names to the BC United. I'm going to let Sherry talk about that a bit more. We're going to talk about the history of their name changes, and then we're going to get into some of the messes that they've caused because a lot of those guys are seeking election in 6 weeks. So, Sherry, why don't you take us through maybe since the 80s? Like both these parties have been around since the early 1900s, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not really relevant to anybody at this day of time, I don't believe. So,
Mm-hmm.
why don't we go from like the 80s till now with all of the rebranding?
Sure. So what I will do, I just want to touch quickly, though, first off, on the BC Conservative Party stopped being active in British Columbia in the late 1960s, and they haven't had any electors since then until recently. And so in the 80s, they were known as the Social Credit Party. We didn't have an official BC Conservative Party. And in the 80s, they were called the SoCred Party. And when I was a kid, it was after Bill Bennett, it was Bill Vander Zalm that was the leader of the BC SoCred Party. And he was a Dutch religious Dutch guy. Like he was Orthodox religious. And so he started taking the SoCred Party further right. And it upset some of the more moderate MLAs. And they started filtering out of the Conservative Party to the BC Liberal Party. And then when Vander Zalm tried to union bust in British Columbia, and he had some scandals, and he was actually, there was a criminal investigation in the sale of his Fantasy Gardens, which was his theme park that he had in Richmond. And to avoid criminal investigation and criminal charges, as politicians do, especially conservative ones, he stepped down and Rita Johnson became the leader of the SoCred Party. But by that time, he had burned the SoCred brand so badly, and most of the MLAs had already left. They scurried over to the BC Liberal Party. And so by the mid 80s, after Rita Johnson lost, she was only in power. And this is another thing that I don't like about conservative parties is they tend to sacrifice their women politicians. They put them like Kim Campbell, it happened to her federally. Candice Bergen, even though I didn't like her
Yeah.
very much, but same thing with her. She should have been the leader of the federal party, not O'Toole or whatever.
Here.
And the same thing happened to Rita Johnson. They put her up there as the fall guy. And so nobody remembers Bill Vander Zalm tanking that party. They remember Rita Johnson tanked that party, which is not true.
Yeah.
So anyways, so by the time Vander Zalm was voted out and Rita Johnson failed, the rest of the Socred Party scurried over to the BC Liberal Party and set up shop in the BC Liberal Party.
So sorry, just to pause for a second. So
Yeah.
what we have is we have the BC Liberal Party being made up of some of the people who went because the Socreds were a bit too far right. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have this
And
party that's starting with outcasts of people who thought you guys are too, and we're seeing a little bit of that now, but we'll
yeah.
get to that afterwards.
Yeah.
So what we have is we have the BC Liberal Party that's made up of people who thought that the Socreds were too far right. Socreds fail, so the rest of them go, okay, well, I guess we're not that far anymore. We're going to be with liberals too. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I don't even know
Okay.
if it's that they're going to be that far right. They're just like, that's where the power is. I'm going to go where the power is. It's the only party that can house us right now. I like the power because it feels good and I like having it. Where can I acquire more of it? I'll do it over here in the BC Liberal Party, even though I'm a conservative.
Yeah,
Right?
and I think that's kind of gross too. Like I don't
Yeah.
disagree with you. I completely agree with you. But it's
Yeah.
why people don't trust politicians.
Yeah.
You should be sticking to what you believe, not, oh,
Yeah.
I believe this because this is what's going to benefit my career most at the time.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Okay, so
so,
we've got the BC Liberal Party. Let's go from there.
okay, so now we've got all the Socred members in the BC Liberal Party. And at the time in the 90s, we were ruled by the NDP, but it wasn't a true version of the NDP. It was a very capitalist version of the NDP. Mike Harcourt, actually, who was the premier here, when he was voted out of office, he went and worked for Jimmy Pattison.
Yep.
And so it was a very corporate NDP, and BC as a whole went kind of right, like the Overton window kind of shifted right. And so our NDP party was more of a centrist, center right, center left party. And then the BC Liberal Party were trying to brand themselves as a centrist party, but really they were a right wing party. They were center right, right wing. They became more right wing, I think, as time went
Campbell.
on. Yeah.
I think it's Campbell's the one who gets credited around mid 80s with
Yeah.
taking the party further right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
Campbell, of
so,
course, is Christy Clark's
yeah.
predecessor. Anyways.
And so the NDP burned their brand pretty bad in the 90s. And that's how we ended up with 16 years of BC Liberals, because no matter how bad that Liberal Party was, people were so afraid to go back to the NDP of the 90s, they kept voting Liberal, which were a conservative party. Right. And so sorry, go ahead.
So do you think a better strategy would for them on a campaign trail to be, hey, we're not the NDP. I don't want to take this into an NDP one because we'll do that on
Yeah.
another episode, but
Yeah.
I just can't help myself. Do you think that their best shot would be, hey, we're not the NDP from the 90s. We're this NDP.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think they could do a lot to divorce themselves from those years, because those were not, that's not a true NDP. It wasn't a true NDP party. It would be more like a centrist liberal party.
Right.
That's what it would be. It would be more like a federal liberal party is what the NDP was
Because they don't
in
have the
BC
benefit of a
here.
name change, right?
No.
They were the NDP in the 90s and they're the
Yeah.
NDP now.
Yeah.
Whereas Falcon and Rustad have gone by other names in
Exactly.
the past.
Exactly. So now we're up to the 2000s, and in comes Gordon Campbell, fresh off of his mayorship of Vancouver, right? He was the mayor of Vancouver. And when he set up shop, he won. Like, they swept to power. They had a majority because people were just
79 out
so,
of 77 out of 79 seats.
yeah, they were just,
Like
the
sweep.
NDP was so bad, so
Yeah.
bad. And it didn't help that there was the criminal investigations that were happening right around that time in the NDP. So they swept to power, and Gordon Campbell, his mandate was cut, 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 cut everything, sell everything, privatize everything. He actually developed a minister of deregulation. It was the only one ever in the country. He had a ministry of deregulation, and that ministry's job was to find out what crown properties they could sell and which ones they could cut regulations for.
And
And
who
so,
who occupied? Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I can't. So the very first thing they did, they went after BC Rail up in the interior, which was the only transportation, federal transportation or provincial transportation, crown transportation up in the interior. And he was determined to sell it, and he sold it off for pennies. And he screwed over the people in the interior, and it's never really recovered up there. It hasn't
And
really
when you say
recovered.
he,
Gordon Campbell.
but who was his minister of deregulation?
I'd have to look that up. I'd have
John
to look that.
Rustad.
Was it John Rustad?
It's John Rustad.
Yeah.
You know what? Sorry, I'm on my I'm gonna look it up to make because I don't want to be wrong, but
Yeah.
I would bet a lot of money it was John Rustad.
Yeah. Well, I know that he was the Minister of Forestry, and believe it or not, he was appointed as the Minister of Indigenous Affairs under Christy
Yep.
Clark.
You know what? I'm totally wrong. It
Oh,
was
okay.
not John Rustad. It was Kevin
Mm,
Falcon.
no.
Kevin
That.
Falcon.
No way.
Yep.
It was not.
Well,
Well,
it's
that.
Kevin Falcon was a minister of deregulation. Give me a sec. I'll get more. I'll get
Yeah.
more.
Wow.
Well, that fits, right? It totally fits.
Minister of Finance, Minister of Health, Minister
Yeah.
of Transportation,
All of
Minister
the.
of State for Deregulation of British Columbia, Kevin Falcon.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kevin
So anyway.
Falcon, who inspired this
Yeah.
by suspending the campaign of the BC Uniteds and merging with the
Yeah.
Conservatives. But back to Sherry to give us more history of Conservatives.
So anyway, so Campbell sold off BC Rail, and it was criminal. Like, he was investigated by the RCMP. They they the RCMP did a raid on the Parliament because they had good intel that he had sold it off for pennies, and there was massive corruption around the deal.
And bribery.
And bribery, yeah. And then,
They called it Railgate.
yeah. And then, in true conservative politician fashion, like Mulrooney, he resigned before he could be, just like Van der Zandt did, just like
Yep.
Mulrooney did. He stepped down, and what did he do? They put a woman in to save the party. Now, the thing about Christy Clark that's interesting is that Kevin Falcon also ran for the leadership of the BC Liberal Party against Christy Clark. She was not a first pick. She won on the fifth round, and she was still deeply unpopular. But she managed to win Point Grey in that election, and they hung on to power. But in
Then,
20,
sorry,
what's
go
that?
ahead. I'm sorry. No,
No.
go ahead. No.
So anyways, but under Gordon Campbell, I mean, Christy Clark was his education minister, and she tore up teachers' contracts. Right? She
I was
tore
going to
them
say
up.
she lost her Point Grey seat, but then was able to get one up in Kelowna.
That was in 2013. That was the
Yeah.
second time they went to the polls. That was the second election, or that was the She won her seat the first election that she was leader of the Liberal Party, but she lost it the next
The
year.
second one, yeah.
The second
Um,
election.
I have to say
And
too, it was a horrible time to be named Christy. It was a
yeah,
horrible time to
I
walk
bet.
around with this name. Everybody. I'm like, it's not me, man. I'm not running the province anyways.
So before Gordon Campbell stepped down, I wanted to just touch on the problems with education because they can be traced right back to Christy Clark tearing up teachers' contracts. She tore them up. They were contracts. They were they were negotiated and ratified contracts, and she just tore them up. And then they spent our taxpayer dollars fighting the teachers union for the next 10 years
Yeah.
only to lose. So there's a whole generation of kids that were screwed over in their education by the BC Liberal Party. And might I add, there was the same thing happened in the 80s with Vanderzam and the Socrat Party because I was in school then. And we had massive strikes
Yeah.
because Vanderzam was trying to bust unions.
Yeah.
So, anyways, Christie tore up the contracts. They fought the teachers. Gordon Campbell was investigated for railgate. He stepped down like a coward and went running away. He also had a DUI in Hawaii that
Oh, that's
added to the
right. I
problem.
forgot about
That
that.
added to the problems too.
Yeah.
He actually fled. He fled authorities on the island and then refused to go back for the court date to stand trial. Instead, he opted for treatment and said, "I'm not going to drink anymore."
Yeah.
So he never took accountability for the
No.
DUI or evading police or serving any kind of time in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Right. So he used his power and privilege to get out of that.
And
Right.
people say that there's no two-tiered justice system
Yeah.
anyways. I
So,
also want to bring up something else about Christy Clark, since
yeah.
we were talking about liberals and conservatives, and
Hmm.
something that we've talked about when it was posed to her of, hey, you should change the name of your party because you guys aren't liberal. You're not liberal
Yeah.
in the same way that the federal party is liberal, and it's confusing to the
Yeah.
people who vote for you. She said, and I quote, "I'm not in any hurry."
Yeah.
She knew that her brand was advertising one one point of view of politics while actively practicing another one.
Yeah.
She acknowledged it and said, "Yeah, but I'm
Yeah.
not going to change it."
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And so anyway, so Gordon Campbell steps down. It takes a year for them to get a new leader. The leadership race took a whole year. And it was highly contested. Like I said, Falcon threw his hat in the ring. Christy Clark won finally on the fifth round of voting and became the leader of the party. And she brought in Kevin Falcone and gave him as uh, as a a there kind of here's a little
Consolation.
tid a consolation. That's the word I was looking for. Sorry, menopause brain.
I get you.
Yeah. Um, as a consolation prize, she gave him a tasty minister job, a high profile minister job in her cabinet, which was the Minister of Finance.
What minister job do you think Rustad would give him? I mean, let's be honest. The guy traded his party for a position in Rustad's cabinet. That's
Yeah.
just my opinion. I think it's shared by many, though.
Well, it's gonna be interesting because see, I don't think Rustad alone is calling the shots for that party.
I don't think so
I
either.
think I think the feds are calling the shots. The federal conservative party are calling the shots in that party. Because all of a sudden we're seeing all kinds of weird things in that party right now that I've never seen before, where we've got federal candidates running in provincial
Yeah,
ridings and federal and provincial and a lot of provincial MLAs who are now all of a sudden running federally for the Conservative Party. Like it's just really weird what's going on. But anyways, let's go back to 2013. Christy Clark wins. She gives Kevin Falcone the Minister of Finance, and they continue their deregulation. They got transit. They sell off transit. They sell off BC ferries. They and then they attempt to go after BC Hydro, but they don't get it because they
What about
wanted to privatize.
ICBC?
And we'll get to ICBC. Yeah. Then
Yeah.
what they did with ICBC was they skimmed money off of ICBC to pretend like they were balancing the books. So instead of cutting rates for the people, when ICBC turned a profit or whatever, they just took those profits and took that money
Yeah.
out of ICBC and put it in the general coffers to balance the budget, just like our MSP premiums. We were the only province that paid out of pocket for MSP. No other province had those
Yeah, I
charges.
remember that.
And they took and instead of using the user money that they were charging everybody every month and taking it and using it um, to invest in healthcare, they put it in the general coffers. So the MSP premiums never went to healthcare.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they were gutting healthcare. They privatized the janitorial staff. They privatized the oh, there
Hey,
was
we have a
more.
comment.
Oh, hey. So
Generosity,
there was probably
welcome.
more interference that we didn't see on the back end that just hampered ICBC from running better too. Yes, absolutely, Jen.
I agree.
Absolutely. So where was I? So we were talking about ICBC, and then what was I talking about? Sorry.
MSP.
MSP premiums. And that really pisses me off because they could have made the choice to put them in taxes, like in the provincial taxes, like every other province did, but they didn't. They took those, and because they could adjust those premiums yearly um, without having to justify it, because you have to justify an income tax hike, right? Like you have to say, we need to hike your income tax because we need to fund this project, or we're not funding these projects enough, or whatever. You have to make some sort of case for that. Whereas MSP premiums, they can just raise them, right? Because
Yeah.
it's a service fee.
And then they don't get the bad rap for the tax thing too, because they know that their base is
Yeah.
voting for them largely because they believe that they pay less under conservative government.
Yeah. But at the time, too, what was happening was they were fighting with nurses. They closed down family practices and opened all these clinics across the province. They were moving away from a family doctor model. You couldn't get a new family doctor because at the time I was pregnant in 2003, I was pregnant and shopping for a doctor, and I managed to find one. But by 2007, she was part of a clinic, right? And she didn't
Oh.
have her own private practice anymore. Um,
So
so
this
they
has been
did
because
that.
we don't we have a doctor shortage now still. We
Yeah.
do. We have people, a
Yeah.
lot of people in this province who don't have a doctor.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't know that it went this far back though. As long as I
Yeah.
had one, I wasn't paying attention, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they started to because the way they compensated doctors wasn't fair, and actually up until recently, when David Eby just redid the compensation packages for doctors in BC, our doctors here were some of the lowest paid in the country,
Yeah.
and they had to carry all their own overhead for their offices and stuff, which is why clinics became more attractive. Like my doctor was telling me, like she had to pay for her own nurse, and then she had to pay for somebody to come in and cover her practice while she was gone. Whereas in a clinic, she didn't have to worry about any of that overhead.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they didn't get incentivized either by the BC Liberals. And so, and they also privatized the food services in the healthcare setting as well. They privatized food services, they privatized the janitorial services, and it was all under the guise of trying to union bust, right? They were trying to union bust. They wanted to break the unions. They wanted to break the teachers union. They wanted to break the nurses union. That's all it was. And so the quality of care went down significantly, and they were adversarial to healthcare workers So why would you want to go work for an adversarial employer? Right? Like people today are still upset they can't find a doctor, but they never think about how the general public treats healthcare workers and how the government, how the employers treat the workers.
I said that too. At the height of the arguing with people about Soji and vaccines,
Mm-hmm,
um, that like in these smaller towns, you're not afraid that you're going to chase all the doctors and teachers away.
mm-hmm.
Like, how are
And
they?
that's
Who would want to work in a town where they're just crapping on teachers and crapping on healthcare workers all the time?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
just made a TikTok about this yesterday where I was talking about the problems in the interior and how a lot of the adversarial positions towards healthcare workers with the general public are centered in the interior. And who would want to go up there with forest fires, the flooding, the harsh winters, and then you've got people who hate you? Why
Yeah.
would you want to go work in those communities? Right?
And that's where there's the worst because there's such poor staffing up there. That's where you see all of the emergency rooms closing
Yeah.
down in these small towns. Okay, you'll have
Yep.
to go to the next small town if you have an
Yep.
emergency.
Yep.
Like we're
Uh,
lucky in the lower mainland. Like if anything happens, if they
yeah.
were to shut one down, I'm
Yeah.
driving distance within several of them.
Yeah.
You can't say that in the up in the interior.
I live. I live within. I live within 10 minutes from VGH. I can go to UBC Emergent Care or the UBC Hospital, or I can go to St. Paul's. Like
Mhm.
those, I have, and then there's also women's and children's, which I'm very close to,
And
right?
aren't they
And
building a new St. Paul's?
yes, they are. Yeah,
Yeah.
they are. So anyway, that's so they were attacking healthcare. They were gutting. They were trying to bust unions. They were fighting with nurses. They were fighting with QP workers. They were fighting with the teachers union. And
Sorry, and this is while they were still under the umbrella of BC Liberals?
yes, yeah,
Gotcha. Just making
yeah.
sure.
And Kevin Falcone and John Rustad both held significant minister positions under Christy Clark. Kevin Falcone held several as because he's been Kevin Falcone has been in office since 2001, and John Rustad has been in office since 2005.
However, Falcon stepped away for a while.
Yes, he did. He stepped away from 2016 to 2021. He stepped away to go raise his kids and do some other things. He went to work for uh, a, a, a hedge fund or something like he went to work
Yeah.
for a investment firm of some sort or whatever.
But he did
Um,
hold a lot of impressive minister jobs. He was Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, deregulation, like we talked about, Minister of Finance, the
yeah,
juicy minister position that Christie
yeah.
gave him.
Yeah, yeah. So and while he was in those, and then Rustad, like we said, was the minister of forestry, and then he was the minister of indigenous and reconciliation, which just blows my mind.
Okay, tell
That
us why it
somebody,
blows your mind though. Because a lot of people would go like, why not?
because he's sorry. I mean, I don't know how to sugarcoat that any
You have
better.
to
Like
you have to
he's
give examples though. You can't just give an accusation like that.
well, I don't just the things that well let's talk about what he's running on, which is he wants to end reconciliation, right?
Yep.
He wants to end reconciliation. He wants to bring back trophy hunting of grizzly bears. He is all about burn, baby, burn, drill, baby, drill, cut, baby, cut. Like he doesn't care that it's indigenous land. And he also has been telling people that reconciliation and land back means that um, people are going to lose their homes to the indigenous people in British Columbia, that the indigenous people will own their homes, not them. He
Yeah.
came right out and said that not even like 6 months ago.
Can I add to this?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Also, they're holding BC town halls. And even though they say that these are nonpartisan town
Mhm.
halls,
Mhm.
the Conservatives are there.
Mhm.
They're in these town halls, and they're
Mhm.
speaking at these town halls in some cases,
Yeah.
like standing up and holding the mic.
Yeah.
And they keep saying, "Oh, I know we're nonpartisan, but here's so and so from the Conservatives, the BC Conservatives, speaking on it." And these BC town halls
Mhm.
are talking about bills, and quite a few of the bills affect Indigenous people. For example, one bill that they're wanting to repeal, or fight
Repeal.
is
Yeah.
where Indigenous people have say on what is built
Yes.
on land.
Yeah.
Yes.
Another one is water rights. They
Yeah.
don't believe that Indigenous people should have access
Yeah.
to water rights first in an emergency.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're when you said about land and the fear, right? These BC town halls
Yeah.
are, and if you look at the crowd,
Yeah.
I mean, that says a lot in itself.
Well, I don't even have to look at the crowds. I just look at my parents. My parents are small C conservatives, and they get their news. They're in their 70s, right? So they get their news from the TV. They get their news from Global and CTV and Facebook, right? Like that's where they get their news from. And my mom was all about how their plan to reclaim some of the land that's been dammed for farming and stuff. But it has hurt salmon runs. They're trying to reclaim. They're trying to be more in line with the environment, and so they're removing the dams, and they want to flood the floodplain again with water so that the salmon can spawn properly. She's just like they're stealing their land, and it's like, but it wasn't their land to begin with, right? So, anyways, so getting back on track here. So Rustad, and actually Rustad is part of the old Reform Party, right?
We haven't even
He's
talked about the Reform Party.
the BC Reform Party, right? He was part of that party, which
Okay,
was
give a brief for people who don't aren't familiar with the Reform Party.
well, it's
Where
the
would you put
front
them on the
runner
political spectrum?
between the PPC and the. Actually, I would put him right where the federal CPC is right now. The Reform
So another
Party
conservative party.
has pretty much taken over the CPC, and they're running on reform talking points. Preston Manning, which is very much, sell off all the resources, privatize everything, give oil and gas 100% leeway to do whatever they want, no matter the environmental cost. That's reformers, right? And very and more religious, right? So no women's reproductive rights, no marriage is one man, one woman kind of thing. That's the
Body count
Reform
of
Party.
what happened to the Reform Party?
It folded pretty much. The Reform Party in Alberta was taken in, or Preston Manning's Reform Party was amalgamated into the CPC, into the Canadian,
UPC.
or not the UPC. This was a federal. There was federal too.
Oh,
There was
federal.
federal and provincial, but it was the Canadian Heritage Party, which was Stephen Harper's party. Was the uh, so it started out as the Reform Party under Preston Manning, and then it became the Canadian Heritage Party, I think, or something like that, under Stephen Harper. And then Stephen Harper came along and amalgamated the two parties, the Progressive Conservatives and the more right-leaning Canadian Heritage Party together. And that's how the Reform Party was absorbed.
And the heritage, same heritage as Heritage Foundation?
No, no, I don't think so. But uh, close ties. Like
Close
I
ties,
don't
but
think
not
they
the
were
same guys.
not the same guys, but Stephen Harper absolutely was part of that. But that's a different TikTok. So, anyways, or different conversation. John Rustad um, was part of the old Reform Party, and so he is far right and always has been. But he's been under the BC Liberal tent because the BC Liberal tent is very much like the federal CPC party, which is you have moderates and hardcores all under one tent.
Capital C, little c.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and when we say little c, just to clarify for viewers out there, when we're talking about little c conservatives, we're talking about progressive conservatives. They don't care about social issues. They're not into culture war. They just want fiscal responsibility. That's a small c conservative. A
And I think
big
that they're
c.
not as I think they're not as loud as the big C conservatives, so a
No,
lot of
they,
times they don't get considered. But I think that it is more common, I think
yeah,
amongst most conservatives, I
yeah.
think it's more common to be a small C, but it sounds like it's more common to be a big C because they're so much louder.
Yeah, and they're also, yeah, I think that's fair. And I also think that a lot of religious people equate conservatism to religion.
I agree.
And it's not actually, because a lot of people who are progressive conservatives, you'll never know what their religion is.
Yeah.
They don't they're respectful, and they're in the social contract is what I'm trying to say. I guess they're part
Well
of the
said.
social
Yeah.
contract, right? Which is where large c conservatives tend to not be. They're more libertarian. They don't want to be part of society. They're not really looking out for their neighbors, that kind of thing. That's not really what they're about, right? So anyway, so we're in the 2000s. Christy Clark's at the helm. Teachers are on strike. Teachers are upset. Class sizes are massive. Teachers are being fired and let go. Schools are being shut down, and school boards are having no overage budgets imposed on them. And if they can't, they're being undercut. The school districts are getting less and less money, and they're being told that if they can't balance their budget, they'll all be removed, which is what happened to the VSB. The VSB, um,
Vancouver School Board.
Vancouver School Board, which is where my kids attend, um, they were told they had to make do with what the government was willing to give them, and they said, no, we can't. This isn't enough. And they said, then close schools. They didn't care. They didn't
No,
care. They wanted to take my kids. There was talks about taking my kids from kids and busing them all the way down into East Van, like out by the P&E, just to go to school.
that's crazy. Like, I
Isn't
get
it?
it because I know the area.
Yeah.
It's not close.
No. And
Yeah.
and I'm not one to be like talking about bad neighborhoods and stuff like that doesn't, but I didn't like the idea of my 6-year-old being put on a school bus, taken out to a school that was so far away from where I lived, that was known to be in a neighborhood where they were had to do needle sweeps every morning on the playgrounds.
East Van's arguably of all of the areas in Vancouver, East Van is the roughest. It
It is
is.
very rough. And
Yeah.
and I am, and for me, I can make those choices, but you're making those choices for my 6-year-old. And what happens if he has a run-in with somebody on that playground, or waiting for me to come and get him, or waiting for the bus? I
Yeah.
can't get to him fast enough,
Yeah.
right? And it was without consultation. They just decided. And what they did was they took an old school, like the school my kids were in, Henry Hudson, that was over 100 years old, and they took away the teachers lounge, they took away the library, they cut back they put a classroom where the lunchroom was. Like they even put a classroom in the gym, I think. They stuffed that thing to the rafters, and they didn't bring
Okay.
it up to code.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to try to steer us back
Yes.
into where we
Sorry.
were going. We have about
Yeah.
20 minutes left.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand.
Um, so right now we're in the mid 2000s with
Yeah.
just the BC Liberal Party, which is
Yeah.
all the conservatives, because there was no other conservative parties at that time. They were all
Yeah.
just kind of living as BC Liberals.
Yeah.
So then where do we go from there?
So they're getting more and more hammered in popularity, and people are getting more and more upset. But the BC NDP can't get itself together to really come at them hard. And so they get voted in again. But in the last election before they left power, like the previous election, like we were talking earlier, Christy Clark gets beat out by none other than David Eby in Point Grey. And she doesn't have a seat. She's the leader of the BC Liberal Party. They've limped to power again because it was touch and go. She ends up, I think she had a minority government, and she loses her seat in Point Grey. They get some backbencher to fall on their sword, and they run her up in Kelowna, which is a conservative stronghold. And she manages to keep power. And they go at it again. And this time they're warring with Indigenous people. They're trying to impose the HST on us without any consultation or referendum, which actually that Bill Vander Zalm defeated. He saw that as
Yeah.
his opportunity to come back and get the limelight one last time. And prices were getting out of control. Vancouver was fed up with developers. They were selling pre-sales out of the country in Hong Kong and mainland China. Bob Rennie was sitting on city planning boards at the municipal level. She was getting kickbacks from her own party. We found out that she was getting another $20,000 a year or something from the BC Liberal Party through donors to beef up her salary. She caused teacher strikes. Her kid was in private school, so it didn't affect her kid. Like, people were just pissed off. And yet still in 2016, she almost got to power again.
Yep.
Which just
Okay,
blows my
but
mind.
let's get off of her because she's
Yeah.
not even running this
No.
time.
Yeah.
And let's just stay with the party so we can talk about the main
Yeah.
players, Rustad and Falcon.
Yeah. So they were part of that government that allowed money laundering to flourish in our luxury goods markets. And Kevin Falcon was directly involved in that because he was the Minister of Finance at the time.
Yep.
And they sat there and they lied to us. Oh, no, there's no money laundering happening here. Those reports are widely nope. And they both towed the company line, and they voted in step with the Liberals. They also both voted for Soji.
Okay, wait a second. So what party were they part of when they did this?
BC Liberals.
So they're with the BC Liberals.
Yeah.
And they're lying about the money laundering, which turned out to be true.
Yeah.
So the BC Liberals brought in. Do you want to talk about what the Liberals did this time? We have about 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
And we want to cover what they did, good and bad.
Yeah.
And Falcon causing the rise of the Conservatives by kicking out Rustad.
Yeah.
I thought maybe we could go there because that way it brings us to where we are right now. And then maybe next week we can go into the particulars of what the party did, good and bad.
Sure, we can.
Or would you rather do that? Because like I said, we got about 15 minutes left.
I think I can wrap it up in 15. But so
Okay.
all I want to say really quick is that two major things that these two gentlemen, for want of a better word, are running on now is no climate change. Climate change isn't a thing. Ending all climate green activities in the province, and taking Soji, the Soji resource, out of schools.
Even though they had supported it when it was introduced.
They voted with it, and they continued to help establish it in the province until the BC Liberals were voted out of power.
And they've never talked about why they've changed their minds.
No.
That would be a good TikTok. Get their voting records, show how supportive they were of the thing that they're saying that they're campaigning on removing.
Yeah, exactly. So
okay, so let's talk about the how we went from just a Liberal Party to having the BC United Party and the Conservative Party.
Okay, so in 2021, Kevin Falcon announced that he was looking at changing the name of the BC Liberal Party, and despite current rhetoric on TikTok, it wasn't because they wanted to distance themselves from the federal Liberal Party. It was because they had burned their brand so badly that they were unelectable in the
But I think that's
province.
important that you say contrary to rumors that you see, because
Yeah,
the word on the street is the
yeah,
reason that BC United was BC United instead of BC Liberals is, oh, we
yeah.
don't want to be associated with Trudeau, which isn't true. It's we don't want to
No,
be associated with the things that we
that
did
we
under
did.
the name
Yeah,
of BC Liberals.
exactly. Exactly. And that's exactly why they did it. And it was way before Trudeau started to become deeply unpopular. Way
Okay,
before.
so Falcon says, okay, we're not going to be BC Liberals anymore. We're going to be BC United. What
Yeah.
happens next?
So what happens next in 2022? John Rustad, who started to be more and more vocal over the pandemic, started to be very anti-science and very trans, like anti-trans and all of that stuff. He started to be more vocal about that. And he said, I think it was over vaccines. He said he was anti-vaccine. And Kevin Falcon said, that's it. That's a step too far. You got to go. Pack your bags. And kicked him out of caucus. So he ended up sitting as an independent. Remember, his riding elected him as a BC United MLA. Democracy said they wanted him as their MLA represented by the BC United Party. Kevin Falcon took that away from those people, those constituents, by kicking him out of caucus. And then he became an independent. And then that was around the time Pierre started sniffing around BC really big time. And he saw an opportunity. He saw somebody who was floundering, didn't know which way to go, was on his own, and said, hey, let's start a BC Conservative Party, because Rustad already has those values. He's already part of that ideology. This is perfect. I'm
And
going to
this is
pack
when?
him.
This is spring of last year.
No, 2022.
2020. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was 2023.
No, he was kicked out of caucus in 2022 and then sat as an independent for almost a year. And then in February of 2023, he announced he was going to be the leader of the BC Conservative Party.
Yeah,
And
sorry,
he's,
that's what I meant. I meant the
oh,
BC
yeah,
Conservative Party was
yeah,
reborn in
February
2023.
2023. But there's never been there's never been an election for him to be leader. He just appointed himself leader
Yeah.
of the BC Conservative Party.
Now that's something to important to bring up too, and I think that we should bring that up into TikTok as well,
Yeah,
because so many people who are anti-EB right now are saying, you know what, this guy's running the
yeah,
province, he was never even elected. Well,
yes,
neither was Rustat. The
yeah,
guy that you're putting in charge of the party, who's campaigning for an entire party, was also never voted in.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
so we
anyways,
went from BC Liberals to
yeah,
Falcon says, okay, we can't go as Liberals anymore. We're going to be BC United.
yeah,
Kicks out Rustad, and then
yeah,
Rustad's like, okay, I'm going to be independent. No, no, now I'm going to be conservative. So now we
yeah.
have BC United and BC Conservatives. Then what?
He continued in the spring sitting as a independent, or as the BC Conservative, the only BC Conservative member. They didn't have any other members. And then when they came back in September, another MLA crossed the floor to sit with John Rustad. And which that really pisses me off. It's like, if you ran and were elected by that party, you ride it out till the end. I'm sorry. Or you step down and cause a by-election. Like, you shouldn't be allowed to screw over your constituents like that. Did they
No.
vote for you to be an independent? No. They voted for you to be a BC United MLA.
Yeah,
Right?
I agree. And I think that to pretend that it's just about the person and not the party at all, I think is naive.
Yeah.
I think that if you're wearing, let's say you're wearing orange and you're like, hey, I'm NDP, and then you vote me because I'm NDP, and then I go, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm going to go with the
Yeah.
Liberals because they're a bit more popular and I have a better chance over here.
Yeah.
Liberals and NDP have a different mindset, just like
Yeah.
Conservatives and BC United had a different mindset.
Yeah.
Anyways, I get what you're saying. I agree with you.
Yeah. So anyway, so another MLA crossed the floor, and then coming into 2024, they have been actually courting more and more. They were courting more and more BC United MLAs to jump ship and come run under the Conservative banner. And then after the writ dropped and they announced the election, uh, 4 BC United MLAs crossed the party to the Conservative Party. Kevin Falcon could not get any traction in the polls. People were done with the BC United Party. And then he's like, no, 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 we're not gonna merge. We're not gonna merge. You know, Rustad's like, I don't want to have anything to do with him. He kicked me out of caucus, blah, 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 blah. And now, you know, and then we got the bombshell that we got like last week where Rustad's like, where Falcon's like, well, you know, I've thought about it and we need to take on the BC NDP and stop their destructive policies from ruining our province. And, you know, everybody that I asked that repeats that to me, I said, what destructive policies? And
Yeah.
they can't name any. They can't name
Yeah.
any. Usually they start with hospital closures. And I'm like, well, how many hospitals do you think are actually going to shut down when they cut 4.1 billion out of the healthcare budget?
Yeah. I think that they're a little bit more nervous than general, not just because I think it would be like this anyways because of the current political climate that we're living
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
But I think I think they got way more nervous when NDP got Manitoba. And Saskatchewan is also facing an election this fall.
Yes.
And there's a lot of NDP, like if the NDP can get some of the rural guys,
Yeah.
they can get Saskatchewan too. And I said that last year. I actually said it to Chris Barber. I said it to just kind of bug him, but I was kind of half serious too. If they lose prairies to NDP, I
Yeah.
think for them, if they're able to turn BC from NDP to Conservatives, I think that that would be a much bigger win than losing both Saskatchewan and Manitoba put together. That's
Yeah.
just what I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and we're an NDP stronghold. We are.
Yeah.
We and federally we vote NDP as well.
Yeah.
Generally in BC, it's. I've said it. You know me. I've said it millions of times. Pierre deliberately interfered with our election.
Yeah.
He
With his axe to
deliberately.
tax in
Yeah.
BC, we're
Yeah.
not even if Pierre wanted to change carbon tax for British Columbians, he has
Yeah.
no power to do so
No,
at
he
all.
doesn't.
But he comes here and he gets everybody all excited like he
Yeah.
has the
Yeah.
power to be able to do that. And he's lying through his
Yeah.
teeth. He treats Canadians like they're stupid, like they can't tell the difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like telling
Exactly.
people that electricians make electricity by grabbing lightning on 4 different occasions.
I know, I know, I know. Well, and just the lies that he talks about the opioid crisis. And that's something that has really been the messaging around that has been poor on the left is that BC actually is not that much worse than Alberta. Like
Yeah.
where Alberta but Alberta doesn't talk about it. And
No,
neither does the federal Conservative Party. And
of course
Alberta's
not.
not really doing anything about it. And that's the other thing too, is that if you think that Rustad and Falcon are going to do something about the opioid crisis that they allowed to get to the where it is, they allowed that. They just ignored those people.
Don't you remember what they did during the Olympics?
They bussed them
They
all out to
shipped them all up
Midwest.
to Kelowna.
I
They
know.
went to the downtown east side.
Yeah.
They gathered up as many homeless as
Yeah.
they could. They shoved them on buses and
Yeah.
sent them up the highway.
That was Gregor Roberts too,
That
who a
was
lot of
Gregor
people,
Roberts,
oh,
bike
he was
lane
such
guy.
a, people are like, oh, he's so green, he's so leftist. No,
No, he's
no, he's
not,
he's a
because he put in
conservative
bike
that
lanes.
recycled. Yeah, he's a conservative that recycled is what he was. But what's so frustrating for me and what I find just so unethical is this slimy we're joining forces now to take on the
Yeah.
NDP. Like it's just I can't even say it with a straight face, like without a sneer, because it infuriates me that they are being manipulating the British Columbian public like this. And these people who haven't paid attention to politics before or didn't live in BC under the BC Liberals don't remember paying tolls. They don't
Yeah.
remember paying
Oh, the bridge
MST.
tolls. Do you remember the bridge tolls?
Yeah, well, we had to have
Horrible.
an account. We had to have an account because my husband would work in
Horrible.
Surrey sometimes, and we had to pay that.
Like, because you can't, when you live here, you don't have the option of not going on a
No,
bridge
no,
unless you just stay within your 15-minute city. Unless I
yeah,
stayed with everything that's in walking distance. Do you even
yeah,
know how many bridges I have around me? I
yeah,
can't go anywhere without going over a damn bridge. And they
yeah,
were charging me every single time. Anyway, we have about 5 minutes left.
yeah,
So now I want to talk about going forward then. Um, Next week we're going to do this again Tuesday at 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. I'm going to try to stream it on TikTok too, if I can get my stuff together and figure out how to do a laptop at the same time as my phone and still
yeah.
have Wi-Fi. But do we want to stick with, because I feel like we could still fill another hour talking about Falcon and Rustad and the Conservatives, or do we want to go in a more positive way and talk about David Eby for an hour? What
Well,
would you rather do?
I think it would be good to maybe highlight the things that the NDP have done in the last 8 years that
Okay.
have been to clean up the mess of the BC Liberals.
Maple, what would you rather do?
Can't hear you,
Yeah, I
sweetie.
can't hear you.
I shouldn't call you
I think
sweetie.
that's a good idea, actually.
Got it. Well, because this one was a lot of bad news, bad news, bad news,
Yeah.
and I don't want people to think that that's the only angle of our show. I don't want them
Oh, no,
to
no,
think that
no.
it's three ladies just bitching about
Bitching
people
about,
that they're not going to
Yeah.
vote for. I want
yeah,
it to be also this is what the ladies think about why people should consider voting for
yeah,
David Eby and the NDP, and these are all the good things that they've done over the last year. So let's talk about some of that next week. We'll be in touch.
yeah,
And then that's what next week will be. Like I said, we're going to try to get this on TikTok as well. We'll
yeah.
also be uploading this onto YouTube.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And we're going to do this every single Tuesday until the election. And then after
Yeah.
that, I'll probably get you guys to entertain me for an hour about Pierre Poilievre because you know how much I love to talk about that man.
Yeah. And if anybody has any questions,
Or feedback. Like if anybody wants to know something or something we haven't covered.
If yeah, so we're looking for feedback on what we could do better or what
Hmm.
you want to see from us. We're looking for requests or anything that you're not sure about that you want to see us address before the election. Again, we're going to be focusing mostly on provincial stuff until the election because it's so important.
Yeah.
But we would consider other things. But
Hmm.
send us what you want to see, what you
Yeah.
want to see us talk about, any questions you want to ask, and any feedback on what we can do better.
Absolutely. Does that sound good to you, Maple?
sounds awesome. And I'll put the email address where you can reach us
Great.
um, in the doobly doo down below. In
In the
the in the
doobly doo down below, and then I'll make
Yeah.
a TikTok afterwards. When we have this download, I'll take some clips of what
Hmm.
we talked about,
Yeah.
so we can get it out there so that we can let people know what's going on. Then, like I said, hopefully I can get my stuff together and then stream it on TikTok next week.
Yeah. Sounds good.
awesome.
Awesome. Well, this has been great.
Hmm.
I love talking to
Yeah.
you about this stuff. I love soaking up all your information.
I
Oh,
loved how
thanks.
this all went. It was great.
Yeah. It
Thank you
it
so
was
much for
really
putting
great.
this together, Maple. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And yeah, thanks, Christy, because it's good for me to have somebody to bounce off of and somebody else to be watching the clock as well. Because
Yeah.
I'm one of those people that just kind of, it's like stream of consciousness, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to remember to keep. It was bad when I used to. Well, you guys know I was in recovery for a lot of years, and so when I would get up at the podium to speak, I would have to have like a two watches and a phone, and because I would just lose track of time,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I think what we'll do, we'll get in touch with the stuff that we want to talk about the NDP for next week. And then
Yeah,
when I make my notes, what I'll do is I'll put like time limits on so that I
yeah,
can take so because I we're pushing about half my list or a quarter of my list onto the
right.
next time we get to talk about Falcon and Rustad. But when
Yeah,
we do the NDP next week, I'll do a better job of keeping us on track.
yeah.
Awesome.
Sounds good. All right.
All
Okay.
right.
Awesome.
Thank
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 you,
you
you
very
guys
much,
so
everybody.
much. I'll see
everyone.
you on TikTok.
Yeah.
Also, Maple, I need to text. I got to text about you while we were doing this. So get in touch with me after we get off.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Bye,
All right.
All right.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.